Uh, Again, today's talk is going to be in English, and my name is Andrei Logotov, and I'm an assistant professor at Moscow State University School of Philology. And before we start, well, I'm going to say a few words about what we're going to do today, what we're going to talk about today, and then I will open the floor to the other participants to talk about themselves. So today's talk is called Sounding the Post-Human or the Non-Human. I myself, I come from a literary studies background, and although I've been doing sound studies for about 10 years now, it was only very recently that I got interested in the bundle of post-human approaches in the field. And I think there are two people to blame here. The first one being John Mowat and his 2015 book called The Ambient Humanities. And the second one is one Holger Schulze. And I think one of our participants tonight knows him pretty well. And he is the director of Sound Studies Lab in Copenhagen, and a prolific author whose 2019 book, The Sonic Persona, is written along the lines of post-human research. Sound studies and post-human studies are roughly age mates, so they're about the same age. And I guess they both, albeit in different manners, struggle to be part of the academic landscape, and they both succeeded at that. I guess the most interesting part to me is the slow infusion of post-human discourse, the language in which it is staged, and the optics that it supplies to academic research and artistic practices. And this marriage between research and art is definitely something in which both of the fields share. We only have 2 hours or so today, so I'm not sure if we actually have the time. We're going to have the time, probably not, to cover a lot. But Mila and I, and Mila is my colleague, who is both from the Sound Anthropology Seminar, which I am head of, and the Library for Foreign Literature. We put together a small list of questions that I'd like to verbalize right now to somehow frame our conversation today. But this is not a mandatory list, so I mean, the participants don't have to, to keep in line with it. So the questions are we already post-human or not yet? Or have we always been? Is being post-human only a question of merging with technology, or is there anything else beyond that? How does our sonic experience become different if we accept the post-human framework? What do we make of agency and subjectivity in the days of the post-human? How do we come together and form solidarities in this age? What does our environment sound like? Are we part of it, or are we humans listening in on the post-human from the outside? And what do we do with our listening habits? Well, all the questions aside, I'm really excited about today's talk. And I think we're going to hear a lot of input from different perspectives and get enough fodder for further research and artistic work. As it has been agreed with all the participants tonight, we'll do our talk in 2 rounds. First, I want to give floor to each of you to maybe present yourselves in more detail or say a few words about what you're going to talk about today. Then we can take a couple of questions from the audience, if there are any, and proceed to longer presentations. We're going to have 3 presentations tonight, between 15 and 30 minutes each. And hopefully we'll have a chance for a discussion and questions both in between the papers and at the end of the talk. We welcome all kinds of questions from the audience in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and will serve as a mouthpiece on the part of the audience. Please feel free to post questions either in English or in Russian. I will be able to translate, no problem. Also, we might not be able to answer your questions right away, So please do not repost them too enthusiastically. I mean, I'll be keeping track of the chat, and all the questions are going to be there. And again, I hope that everyone is as excited about our today's conversation as I am. And without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to our friend and guest from Denmark, whose name is Jacob Eriksson. And Jacob, please, can you say a few words about yourself and maybe frame your talk, what you're going to talk about later? Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Yeah, so it's right, I'm Danish, but I live in Germany. I live in Berlin. So a bit of background about me. I studied musicology and philosophy back in Copenhagen, where Holger Schulze, you mentioned, he is now part of the Department of Musicology there. Then I did a master's degree in sound studies here in Berlin at the University of the Arts. And now I am doing a PhD at sound studies in Berlin at the University of the Arts. So I stay in that institution. My research, my PhD research, is on how post-human theories are addressed in sonic arts. So I'm not really going to talk too much about everyday listening practices, as we know from the sonic persona and Holger Schulze's approach, but more about sound art practices. And for today's talk, I've been preparing a bit of theory and then 3 examples of sound art, which all have some biology in it. So we will encounter birds, spiders, and bacteria through sound. I hope that it will open up for some good questions and some good discussions. Yeah. So, yeah. Currently, other than doing my PhD, I'm lecturing in sound studies and in musicology and yeah, a bit around in Copenhagen and in Berlin. I'm also active as a sound artist, so I have this double-sided approach also to my research, that I can see it from the artistic perspective, not just from the academic analyst perspective, which I think is a great force in order to understand the somewhat esoteric, still esoteric genre of sound art. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jacob. And now I would like to give the floor to Marie and Katya. You can do it together, because I know that you're planning a joint presentation in the long term, but right now you can either talk separately or together, please.
I think we will talk separately. Who will start, Masha?
All right.
Katya.
Okay. So I'm PhD in literary studies. I graduated from Silesian University in Poland. Now I'm teaching at ITMO University, critical posthumanism ethics of science and technologies, and participating in posthuman studies lab in Moscow. So we are researching something connected with geology, posthumanism, bacteria. Also, we have a bioartist in our membership, among our members. And also, I would say that sound studies is not my main topic. Sometimes I'm thinking about sound and its philosophical dimension, thanks to discussions with my friends and colleagues, with Masha. And her insight into sound is inspiring for me. And actually, I hope that today we will have an opportunity not only to speak about sound, but also to listen to different samples. And so I wish us all tuned ears and pleasant listening, maybe not only ears, but also other parts of our organisms. And as I understand my participation in the discussion, I'm here to outline the general direction in the humanities, post-humanities, new humanities, which among other things sets and in some way makes possible sound studies. So I will speak mostly about general direction, which is sometimes called post-humanism. So thought direction, which is aimed at going beyond the limits of the human towards the other, most often animal other, machinic and technological other. And in this regard, I'm going to focus on three theses. First, my understanding of dialectics posthumous, posthuman, and the connection between the term posthuman, death, heredity, inheritance, and future. And this is the biggest part of my speech. Secondly, I will say some words about pure voice acoustic, horrid voice, and wild wisdom in the context of Nietzsche. And third, I'm going to speak about pollution, noise, and Haraway's concept of troubling, to stirring up water, to stir up suspension in glass, troubling times and problems of inheriting the future world, which is inscribed in today's sections of different species. And I will be in dialogue with Masha, and she will extrapolate these ideas, I suppose.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think this concerns everybody. Ekaterina mentioned that she was part of the Post-Human Studies Lab, and we're going to post all the relevant links with the video, with the recording of today's talk. So now on to Masha, I guess.
Okay. Hey, everyone. So my name is Masha. I graduated master program in University of Arts in Belgrade, Serbia. This was visual study, and after that I graduated Rochenka Art School, where I changed my perspectives, and now I work with sounds, but also my work, I work with sounds and with visual. I made some DIY devices. I work with field recordings. So today, yes, and with Katya, we also make some projects. And today I will show some sound works with which was related to voice practices, field recording practices, but through post-human perspectives. And I want to say that all works are not an illustration of the directions of posthumanism. This is some kind of optics through which we can talk about the relationships between philosophy, sound, acoustics, and art. So my talk was not about talking, it was about to listen some sound art pieces.
All right, Masha, thank you very much. And I hope that we will be able to post some of the pieces you're going to talk about today in our group on Facebook. So now, well, the talking stick goes to Dennis, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Denis Ivkov. I'm from Moscow. I'm a philosopher and anthropologist. I'm interested in, such field as space anthropology, or we can call it like maybe social studies of outer space. And in the context of our conversation, I'm interested in techno-animism on the orbit. I read maybe about 10 diaries that were written on the orbit by cosmonauts, Russian and Soviet cosmonauts, and some remarks in this series were dedicated to the problem of techno-animism. And today I would like to present some remarks about controversies or challenges inside of this field of animist studies. So, thank you.
All right. Yeah. So, I have one more remark. I didn't realize that we have like the crowd is so international, right? Because it only seems like we only represent 2 countries, but obviously that Masha and Katya have some solid European backgrounds. I guess this makes our conversation today even more interesting. If anyone in the audience have any general questions, we can possibly address a couple right now. So I'll take a look on the chat, and the chat is empty, right? So the chat is in its original pure state. Okay, so we will not disturb the purity of the chat. Okay, let us give maybe 5 seconds to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I guess we can start with the long turns, and the audience will have some time to make questions. So the first long turn goes to Dennis, because I guess his talk is going to be the most general of all. So Dennis, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Dear colleagues, let me build up my presentation around the theoretical, empirical, and even political concept of animism.
Yeah, Dennis, I have a stupid question for you. Just, I'm very sorry. How much time do you need?
50 minutes.
15 minutes. All right. I'll be checking.
I think 50 minutes, 20 minutes.
Oh yeah, 20 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let me build up my presentation around the theoretical, empirical, and even political concept of animism that reflects the controversial relations between humans and non-humans. This concept is successfully used in broad context of social science, art, and even everyday life all over the world. I would like to start from the short story about Vladimir Lenin, who is considered as a big fan of hunting. Once in the winter, Lenin was waiting for the game at the hide. Suddenly, a beautiful red fox appeared near the hide. Our hunter was charmed. He didn't fire a shot. The game slowly passed by the hunter with animal dignity. When other hunters asked Lenin why he didn't shoot, he said that the red fox was so beautiful and he let her live. If we ask any indigenous hunter from Siberia or Amazonia to interpret this story, then he or she would say that the red fox just stole Lenin's soul, and that's why he was mentally blind at that moment. In this sense, hunter's weakness is a result of personal communication or exchange between 2 persons, Lenin and red fox. In this interpretation, the game first sighted the hunter and turned him into the game. It would be crucial for the chief of workers of all countries to appeal to powerful shamans for seeking Lenin's soul. Such indigenous explanation is possible in the frame of animism. This term was introduced into the field of social science by Edward Byrne Tyler in 1871 in his book called Primitive Culture. For Tyler, the representations of savages that their souls have a capacity to leave the bodies during the dreaming or after death was a fallacy or cultural belief of underdeveloped people. But in recent 2 decades, animism as a source for understanding, emancipation, and even decolonization of non-humans means the capacity to recognize non-humans, things, animals, insects, and even spirits as persons with intentions, language, self-consciousness, and other just human essential features. I would like to illustrate animistic claim with an example from Edward de Con's book, How Forest Sings. This is example of a kind of hunting. For Runa Indians in Ecuador, it's very crucial to perceive the reality through the perspective of different animals, insects and birds. For instance, parrots who treated to vegetable gardens. Runa crafts jack straws or wooden figures of falcons that scare parrots. And these wooden figures of falcons look like asymmetrical child drawings or child figures. They are very far from pieces of art, but they are successful because they contain some basic features perceived by parrots as true falcons or true falcons features. In this conception, our affective body is the main trouble or interference that doesn't let to recognize animated cells in non-humans. That's why it's very important to learn how to see and think from a different perspective in this Amazonian ecology of cells. But the problem here is that as an alternative to modern human supremacy and domination in Western world, is suggested military and hunting Siberian and Amazonian enemies. This model is based on the idea that human and non-human creatures want to eat each other, to cannibalize, to steal souls, to cheat, or just survive. Is it possible to be friends with non-humans? For instance, is it possible to be friendly enemies in the big city with pigeons, crows, and so on? Hugh Raffles, in his book called Insectopedia, ethnographically describes crickets' fights in China in a frame of alternative animism. Insects are not boxers or fight dogs of Western world. Since the earliest times, small fighters are considered as friends of hosts. So it's not military or hunting animism. It's an enemies of friendship, mutual dignity, and respect. Another challenge in studies of animism is connected with Western negative heritage of understanding, the concept of life. The idea of anima and life is referred only to living creatures. As philosopher anthropologist Elizabeth Povinelli noticed in her book Geontologies, we forget about inert rocks that were destroyed by mining corporations in Australia. She suggested extending our vision of non-humans and using the notion of existence except the notion of life. In this sense, the politics of capital is not a biopolitics, but it's a geopolitics that thinking about not only life, but about non-life. Povinelli considers that the purest enemy in the world is the capital, who evaluates non-humans as a vital entities that can be a source of profit. Besides, Povinelli criticized Anna Singh's optimistic conception. Anna Zing's book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, and Singh argues that humans and non-humans, in her case, Matsutake mushrooms, thrive or survive together in the ruins of capitalism. But we know other fungi or organisms at the plantations or inside the wastes who thrive or survive together with capital. So in this sense, I would like to conclude that animism is not finished concept. It's permanently under construction, and we shouldn't be mentally blind and respond rather quickly to challenges of theory and empirical cases. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Well, Dennis, that was really, really quick and very interesting and very intense. Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think we can open the floor to some questions. And I will. I'm not going to monopolize my role of a moderator, but I have one question, which I mean you touched upon, but I would like you to elaborate, I guess. I'm very interested in spaces that exist on the brink between the city and the country. So you talked about the forest, and you mentioned the book by Edward de Con. and I've done some sort of sonic studies of city parks, right? So city parks that range over like a very large gamut, starting from like those very little parks, which are basically parts of the streets, right? Up to, you know, very large parks that are basically forests. So can you, is there a special case for that? What do you think? Or they still fall into this dichotomy between, you know, city and non-city life?
Okay, you know, after reading Kohn's book,
Mm-hmm.
you know that every book is a kind of virus. When you read it, when you like it,
Mm-hmm.
you live with it together with ideas of this book. And after Kohn, you know, I started to be more attentive to different creatures around in my environment, right? In the park,
Mm-hmm.
and in the corner of my apartment, there is a lot of trees and a lot of birds. And in the time of coronavirus, in the time of quarantine,
Mm-hmm.
you know this phrase that our nature was cleared, yes, by coronavirus.
Yeah.
But with the absence of humans' presence on the streets, in the parks, and so on and so on. And I was surprised at the number of different birds. It's you know, it's about 10 species maybe. I don't know English equivalents of the name, but believe me.
Well, the
And
native speakers don't know either. Don't worry.
yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Crow and pigeon. This is my level and limit. Okay.
Right.
And of course, my interest to these creatures was based on sounds, on sounds. So
Mm-hmm.
I attempted to recognize them through their sounds, and I think it was my first step in the sense of our conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a hunter, of course. I'm just philosopher, okay. But it was a kind of recognition, I think, in this sense, more attentive than in the time before quarantine.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any questions or maybe comments? Yeah, there is a very nice question actually on the chat. Dennis, do you see it? I will voice it just to be on the safe side. Is there any difference between animism and anthropomorphism?
Yes, of course.
Well, I guess there is a difference, but can you comment on the relationship between these two terms?
I would like to comment because you know it's a kind of trap when you read Kohn's or Descola or Vrech de Castro books. You have a kind of seduction to understand an animism as an anthropomorphism, but as I attempted to show, in the sense of looking from another perspective, we how to say, we are not humans are not a center of world in this sense, is a sense of anthropocentrism or anthropomorphism, because you try to understand the reality from another position, from another perspective. I think that it's a difference. It's a main difference between two concepts and two ways of vision and understanding.
Well, just the last question from me, because this question on the chat is really interesting to me. So like I understand what you're trying to say about the difference between animism and anthropomorphism, but isn't anthropomorphism sort of the first way to access other viewpoints? So before we settle on full-fledged animism, doesn't the path to it go through anthropomorphism? in a way. I'm not sure if I'm
Okay,
talking
Andrei,
clearly, but
I see your point. It's very interesting and it's provocative in a good sense. Yes, I'm not sure because this first step to other creatures, often we know a lot of examples, make you to be blind, because you can see only yourself in this loop of self consciousness, in this reflecting, like Narcissus, right, in the loop of self reflecting and so on. So you are blind in this sense because you have only your own perspective, human perspective. You have no another possibility to thinking in another way or seeing in another way.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And you maybe one more question to Dennis, if anybody wants. Come on, questions to Dennis. No? All right. So, okay, I guess we'll be digesting this. I have a lot, but I'll hold them back for now. And the next long turn goes to Masha and Katya. And as I said before, I think they have a joint presentation. Is that correct?
Well, yes, I think that we will exchange, yeah, during.
All right. Okay.
Conversation.
So this is going to be an exchange. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, I will start, and I would like to question two terms on the start: the post-human and post-humanism. As for me, today they are too incorporated into the discourse of marketing, and people not always understand the meanings of these terms. I hope that war between marketplace and academics is not lost yet in favor of the first, in favor of the marketplace. And we still can use these words without Haraway's skepticism, which I remind says, I am not a post-humanist, I am who I become with companion species. This is a quotation from When Species Meet, her book. Of course, Haraway has a reason to say that, and I will try to show that we have a reason to rethink the post-humanism in this direction too. If you ask me what is post-humanism, well, I think that I will recommend you a book written by Carrie Wolf, What is Posthumanism? Actually, this book answers many questions in very interesting way. And this book, for the first time, introduces the difference between transhumanism and posthumanism. And of course, if you ask me this question, what is posthumanism? I won't answer that it is not about super future where people can live inside machines and change their weak bodies on something more technologically improved. So this is not about. Posthumanism is not understood as a synonym of transhumanism. Quite on the contrary, posthumanism aims to do away with the hegemony of the human subject and characteristics of human subject in Enlightenment humanism way. And of course, we can introduce here feminist critics, which says that human subject till now often naturally imagined as a white, Western, heterosexual and economically privileged male. So such a way of thinking the human which is strictly separated from the nature, from the animal, is criticized in posthumanist approach. Also, posthumanism problematizes and undermines the strict division between nature and culture. We are living rather in nature-culture nature cultures, even dimension, as Haraway puts it, that we can't provide a strict division between these dimensions, as well as I think that we can deny as nature and culture, as some ecologists and environmentalists propose us. I think that we should accept that our nature as well as our culture, these dimensions are mediated by technologies, and we are immersed in this mediation, and we are living in these two discourses at the same time. But at the same time, our companion species and animals and wild animals, even today in the face of Anthropocene, as many philosophers and researchers propose this term for today's geological state, today's geological epoch. So we are all together living in nature cultures. And third point, what is important when we are speaking, which is important when we're speaking about posthumanism, that posthumanism takes seriously and focuses on relations between humans and non-humans, organisms and technology. And here we are together again, and with the other organisms that co-evaluate with us, as well as with technologies that also are rooted in wild world, in nature, are rooted in our culture. And I can say that we also can provide here, introduce here the division. Actually, a clear division, as I said, between post and transhumanism was introduced by Kerry Wolf. And in his book, What is Posthumanism?, Wolf says that post in the posthumanism means not only after the human, and what will be after the human, the posthuman. Who is the posthuman? That post in the posthumanism, post in the posthuman, I would say it is rather and primarily about going beyond this dimension, but also this prefix post emphasizes everything the non-humans that were excluded from the human subjectivity and corporeality for centuries. And primarily we are speaking here about animals and animality, and basically what Derrida in his seminars calls the beast. Also, when we are speaking about posthumanism and the posthuman, we have here the question about prostheticity and prosthetic. Human beings are prosthetic beings, but also I would like to emphasize that we are prosthetic beings in a more complex way. It is not only about our prostheticity in Stiglerian way of thinking, the prosthesis and prostheticity. Our technologies, it is not only about technologies that are the continuations of our body, of our mind and memory. I think that we can go further and say that prostheticity is a peculiar human openness to the other understood in many ways, technological and animal ways. And also posthuman and posthumanism refer to ontological openness of the human. So we cannot without prosthesis. It means that we cannot without the other and its support. We can't live without our significant others, technologies and animals and other organisms, viruses too. And what we call we is in fact a multiplicity of relations between us and not us, inside and outside, organic and non-organic, thing present and things absent. And as far as we are speaking today about sound, let's consider acoustic and assonant between two words, posthuman and posthumous, as well as let's introduce the phrase posthumous son, that refers to the child that was born after the death, that is born after the death of his its death. And here I want to remind Jacques Derrida's 7th session of his seminar, The Beast and the Sovereign, where Derrida plays with the phrase, I posthume as I breathe. And what posthume here means, posthume means here English word posthumous. So Derrida in his seminar, 7th seminar, where he discusses the death of his friend Maurice Blanchot, he is speaking about, he introduces such an interesting phrase, I posthume as I breathe, where posthume is a French word that in English means posthumous. And these words refer both to the Latin word humer and humus at the same time. Posthume, posthumous refer to these two Latin words. Humer means inhale and smell, and humus, as you know, refers to fertile soil as well as to the ground into which the dead body is placed. And humus is also etymologically connected. This Latin word is etymologically connected to human. And maybe this is why posthumanities and today's different research perspectives prefer this word human rather than man. Posthumous and humer, and posthumous, posthume. It is about what comes after burial. And Derrida answered this question in that way, that after the burial, after the posthumous, it is a breath, a new life appears. However, also the most pressing question of inheritance appears after the burial. And in the end, the posthumous is the one who comes into the world after the death of his creator, the one who inherits what he inherited from his predecessors. So this is a child born after the death of his father, posthumous son, the heir. So the posthuman can be understood today as modern men, as we are children born after many deaths, the end of man, the end of history, the end of nature, modernity, university, etc., etc. So we inherit many ends, and also, as well as we, according to Derrida, being posthumous I breath, we inheriting these thoughts of those buried alive, the other thinkers who continue to breathe underground, influencing our decisions even after their death. So posthumous thinking is another proof. It is important what kind of thinking we inherit, what concepts think concept, as Donna Haraway says in her book, Staying with the Trouble. So in a certain sense, the life form of thought is a posthumous life. So the thought is always existing after death. And the posthuman as well as posthumanism can be, and perhaps is, primarily associated with the posthumous in matters of inheritance and thought. If we actually accept this etymological insights provided by Derrida, the order of inheritance can be considered here not only within symbolic decomposition of previous human subject, to create new soil, to grow a new posthuman subjectivity, but also, if we continue to interpret Derrida's idea about posthumous and posthume, so breathing after death, we should also emphasize that he's speaking about false etymology, that posthumous, here the letter H appears in the wrong way. It shouldn't be here. And this etymological fails allows us to speak about the other Latin word, posterus, that is connected etymologically with posthumous. So posterus is about inheritance. It's an heir from Latin. So this is why for the reader, posthumous, or something that appears after death, it's a breath, actually the breathing of new ideas, is rather connected actually with thinking and with future. And this idea, the Reader idea, is opposed to Haraway's idea of humus, because posthumous, posthuman, they also have in connections humus, and humus is rather about compostability, decomposing, and dying to create soil for the growth of new subjectivity, more open subjectivity. So as I posthumous, I breath, or if we continue this idea, I am posthuman as I breath, rather unfolds itself in a long chain of inheritance of ecological states, genes, thoughts, and deeds. So in our inheritance and thinking, we are always already initially posthuman, thrown into the concept, thoughts, temporal nodes, and waves that we have already inherited, and we are not stopping inherited. So post-human times didn't come, as Braidotti says in a book, The Post-Human. They have always been here. Actually, I think that this important analysis between posthumous and posthuman, their connections in different ways, I mean in etymological ways and in assonant ways, could rather show us that this concept, the post-human and post-humanism, is more complex and is not only about super future and technologies when we are all be the robots and so on. So here I would like to ask Masha to continue.
Thanks, Katya. I have only one commentary here about your brilliant speech. That's what you're talking about, the death. I think that sound art and, for example, sound recordings as instruments for make art piece for sound art, it's in some way is these recordings are death. So it's always the death of existence of some events which we recording.
Okay, should I continue, or we can stop here?
Yes, yes.
Because we have also two pieces about, I don't know, pure voice, and they are not so long. We can ask Jacob to continue, for example, and then return.
We can actually. I suggest that we maybe ask a couple of questions after this theoretical part. Then we proceed to you presenting the pieces, and then we'll turn to Jacob, if that's okay with you. All right. So I also, well, I have a lot of questions as usual, but I will limit myself to just one or two. So the first, I mean, this has been very interesting and very insightful to me, because I'm one of the people who still need an introduction to posthumanism. And thanks a lot for making those connections. And I've been trying, you know, to post some concepts and some works on the chat so others can, you know, join in as well. So I have a very stupid and a very naive question. So whenever we have a new theory, there is a new theory to you know, to install itself in some way into academia, into the general, you know, like the landscape of ideas. It has to have different types of claims. So some of the claims have to be very radical, right? To actually to you know, to stop some sort of complacency within the field and motivate people to ask, you know, different types of questions. So my question is, what do you think is the most radical claim of posthumanism? Maybe from your own experience. So when you started with posthumanism, what actually dazzled you? What motivated you to enter that space?
Well, I think that I'm okay with this because I think that in posthumanism there is nothing new, super new actually. It is a continuation of humanist ideas, but these ideas are rethought in a more today's way, in a modern way. So we need a newer, not new actually, but rather the ethics beyond the human, the politics beyond the human, because different non-human actors are introduced into the politics actually. And Foucauldian works show us that these processes existed long period ago, and it wasn't mentioned in the public space maybe, but today we can't deny that this is a part of our public discourse, and we should to do something with it. And to even coronavirus highlights our interconnections, that we can't deny animals from the politics, we can't deny viruses and all the other organisms. We are prosthetic beings, and we cannot live without supports. We are incomplete with the others, and as well as domestic animals and the maybe urban animals cannot live in a wild nature today, and they are also connected with us. So for me, there is nothing new and there is nothing special. And actually, critical posthumanism tries to rethink many classical ideas in the non-human way, in the posthumanist way. So this is maybe a form of rereading of the old texts, and if we change our perspective, we will find very interesting pieces in the old classical ideas actually.
All right, so if I understood you correctly, I'll just rephrase your answer. So your position is that posthumanism is just a seamless transition from a form of seamless transition from humanism per se, and there has been a gradual turn, right, from you know, humanistic framework to post-humanistic framework. All right, good. But this is not what my experience of post-humanism has been, because like every book I open starts with a preface or a foreword that tries, you know, to justify post-humanism, and it doesn't look like a seamless transition to me. But okay, I'll trust you. Thank you.
Okay,
Anybody else have any questions or input or comment? All right, so there is a question from Vasilisa, who was part of our previous talk, and you can see it on the chat. How does posthumanism deal with the concept of soul or anima? And I think this connects your talk to what Dennis was talking about. So can you comment on this one, please?
Well, of course, the posthumanist approach to this problem, to this issue, is rather critical. So posthumanism denies strict dualism of the soul and the body. It is rather about connection, and I could say that they are solving this problem in a sort of a Nietzschean and Spinozian way. So it's a dancing universe, and dance of the body and the soul, the body and the mind, and it cannot exist separately. Well, we can accept it, we can not, but I think that this idea develops thanks to neurophysiology too, thanks to science, we understand more how our body was built by nature, and we can find very interesting interconnections between the parts of our body, even the other organisms such as bacteria that inhabit our bodies, and our mind. So these connections between our guts and minds is very simple today for neurophysiology too, for example. And I think that this strict dualism between mind and body doesn't work today. But maybe, of course, could be different approaches in philosophy and different insights. Maybe they are working too in interesting way with neurophysiological concepts. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have more and more questions from the audience, but we can hold them back for now. Does anybody else amongst the panelists have anything else to say? Yeah, Dennis, please. Yeah, people from the audience, I remember your questions, so they will not go unnoticed. Don't worry.
Okay, Katya, I'm very glad to see you.
Me too.
So many months and years of this quarantine. Guys, I hate Zoom. I don't know about you. I miss for communication in the room. Okay, not virtual. You stressed a couple of times the term wild, in expression wild animal, and I would like to ask you, is there any discussion about wildness and domestication of animals in post-humanist studies? And to connect with Andrei's example, can I consider a pigeon or a crow as a wild animal, or is there any border between wildness and domestication in the sense of urban animals? Thank you.
Thank you for a question. Actually, this is a big problem. I think that even not only for post-humanist studies, because again, coronavirus has put in the center the question of meat production, and when we have domestic animals, and on the other side we have wild animals, and domesticity and domestical and wild animals are strictly connected. Why? Because our farms and production go further, go into the forest, and today we have no sanitary border between wild and domestic. And I think that today domesticity appears to be a sort of unheimlich for our, because we can see that how what we consider as only our understandable, clear, I don't know what else, well, something that we are familiar with, appears to be absolutely dangerous, absolutely non-controllable. And this is why I don't know how to solve this problem. And I think this is an interesting question, how today, in today's world, these two terms, wild and domestic, are coexist. And I think that if we have no sanitary border, or barely have it, these two worlds are strictly connected today. And we have a plastic in ocean, we have, I don't know, human present everywhere, and this is a big problem. And I think that this is why the concept of companion species, understood in a very broad way, and a Haraway's concept, as you know, could help us to solve this problem with wild and domestic, but I'm not specialist, but here, but it's interesting actually. Yeah.
Thank you, Katya. Very short comment. But in this sense, grizzly bear at National Park, Yellowstone National Park, is a subject of human care, right? And it's a subject of zoo politics in this sense. And it's so human and so domesticated as we can imagine. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. Yeah, I want to, put in my 2 cents here, although I'm not a presenter. I've been developing a theory of sonic interfaces over the past few years, and I think that, like when you talk about frontiers and borders between different spaces, I think the sonic modality is sometimes more efficient than the visual modality. Well, talking about the grizzly bear, I think you can hear a lot of the grizzly bear, but thank God you don't see a lot of the grizzly bear. So yeah. So my suggestion is we have a beautiful question from the audience about art. So I think, so my decision, if you agree with that, would be to give floor to Jacob now, and then keep your sound art, Katya and Masha, for a bit later. And your piece can possibly open a new side to the conversation about, sonic arts and, the performative aspects of that. Would you agree with that? Is it okay? All right. Okay, yes. So let's keep our theoretical vein flowing. And yeah, so the floor is yours, Jacob.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for the very nice first talks. And Katja, I think we've been reading the same books, which is good. I don't think I'll cut down in my paper anyway, because we have, I hope that there will be some similarities and then I can add upon it. Though we do understand things alike. I just have to open my PowerPoint here. All right, does it work? Good. Okay, yeah. First of all, of course, thank you for inviting me to this great panel. I've been really looking forward to it. It's also my first time in Russia. Then online, that's a pity, but hopefully I can come soon. So currently I'm undertaking my PhD in what I call the post-human attitude in sonic arts at the Berlin University of the Arts. So in academic research, and especially in philosophy, we are always asked to clarify our terms that we are using. And my research has 3 distinct recurrent terms: the post-human, attitude, and sonic arts, which therefore needs to be clarified. After clarifying them, I want to present 3 examples of the post-human attitude in the sonic arts. That would serve as the basis of today's talk and upon which my research is partly built. I understand the artworks and art practices as carriers of inherent theoretical potentials, which might lie beyond the traditional way of theorizing, or at least shift our perspectives on an already well-described realm, namely that of the post-human. So, first term needs to be clarified. Sonic arts, I take them from backwards. When I speak about sonic arts, I use the term in its widest sense. Sonic arts ranges from traditional notions of music over sound installations, sound performances, radio plays, to listening exercises, but also to the use of sound in other art genres such as visual arts. And actually 2 of 3 examples are not from sound artists, they're from mostly visual artists of the examples for today. So therefore my research is not an analysis of a specific genre one might have called post-human sound art, As a matter of fact, I believe that claiming there to be such a genre called post-human sound art would be a delusion leading to confused dead ends. Instead, what has led me to my research is a tendency that that can be observed in the arts in general in the recent years, namely that of addressing topics found in post-human theories through the arts. My research specifically focuses on the role of sound in the arts and how the post-human is addressed through sonic arts. Second term, attitude. So though it might be possible to point out aesthetic trends of the post-human in the arts in general and in sonic arts specifically, I'm not claiming an aesthetic theory of post-human sonic arts. What my focus is upon is what I call the post-human attitude. So what do we mean when we use the term attitude? I take the notion of attitude from Michel Foucault, and from his examination of Immanuel Kant's text, What is Enlightenment? A text that claims modernity is an epoch. Foucault points out that instead of thinking about modernity as an epoch coming after pre-modernity and in the end ending in post-modernity lined up on a linear timeline, one should rather think modernity as an attitude. And I think it also resonates with Katja's idea of the post-human as not something coming after the death of the human or something after what we now understand as human, but something that I call an attitude that has been throughout history. So where do we find that? In Foucault's text, I quote, "Thinking back on Kant's text, I wonder whether we may not envisage modernity rather as an attitude than as a period of history. And by attitude, I mean a mode of relating to contemporary reality, a voluntary choice made by certain people. In the end, a way of thinking and feeling, a way too of acting and behaving that at one and the same time marks a relation of belonging and presents itself as a task." My emphasis is. So if we contrast the notion of attitude, a mode of relating to contemporary reality as a voluntary choice made by certain people, with Foucault's more well-known concept of the episteme, which is defined as the epistemological unconscious or the unquestioned common sense of reality, we see a clear difference of the hierarchies of the concepts. The attitude is the active relationship to the reality, a reality constituted by the unconscious awareness, if we can say so, of the contemporary episteme. So where Foucault is addressing the modernist attitude in Kant's essay, What is Enlightenment? I am addressing the post-human attitude in sonic arts. And the last key term, the post-human, and this is here where I will kind of repeat Katja again. So what is this post-human I keep mentioning? I'm very deliberately like using the term post-human and not trying to blend in post-humanism or transhumanism without meaning to do that in that exact moment. Often when we speak or when I speak to people not too acquainted with the term the post-human, they have a vague idea of something with robots taking over a dystopian world or living in the Matrix as we know it from science fiction movies. Others ward off the term as a mere buzzword or marketing. Either reaction is not wrong, but they also show a clear definition of the post-human is necessary. I understand the post-human through scholars such as Catherine Hales, Rosa Baidotti, Donna Haraway, and Kerry Wolf. But one of the most comprehensive definitions of the post-human, though, is laid out by Francisco Ferrando. She describes the post-human as an umbrella term which encompasses several categories. And from these categories, I see three main categories, namely those of transhumanism, post-humanism, and ecology. So, transhumanism. The transhumanism derives from the modernist movement of enlightenment and is focusing on enhancement of the human body and mind through science and technology. Examples hereof are mind upload, cyborgs, and immortality. Transhumanism is often that which is connected to science fiction. Second, post-humanism. So post-humanism derives from a more post-structural theoretical realm, such as critical race theory, post-colonial theory, and feminist theory. Post-human theory thereby critically engages with the human as a common notion by deconstructing the social and cultural hierarchical dualisms, such as gender, where man is over woman, sexuality, where heterosexuality is over non-heterosexuality, race, with white over black, geography, where you could say west against, or west over east, or north over south. South is maybe more appropriate these days. Of course not. Religion, Christianity over Islam, or the other way around. Ability, able over disabled, property, rich over poor, and so on. So the argument is that despite the fact that the biological species called human on paper is alike, some humans are more humans than others, in our notions, of course. So the ideal human is, for example, pictured by Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, a white heterosexual, abled Western man. Therefore, post-humanist theory calls for a new humanism from which before mentioned hierarchical dualist structures and idealisms play no role, or at least are addressed, as we, for example, see this with Black Lives Matter movements and the feminist movements nowadays. So the last category of the post-human is ecology. Ecology also addresses dualisms, namely those of human versus animal or culture versus nature. In ecological thought, it is recognized that the human is part of and therefore can be disconnected from nature. The human is therefore interconnected or entangled in nature, which therefore, following Bruno Latour and Donna Haraway, for example, has to be understood as a nature culture, or culture nature, they put it that way. The Anthropocene is often defined as the new geological epoch coming after the Holocene. Because of the widespread use of the Anthropocene in the humanities, we can arguably here talk about a humanist geological notion that is as much a reflection on the role of the human as an ecological being as a traditional geological reflection. So, of course, these three categories is my argument. They are just scratching the surface of what is encompassed in what we can think is the post-human. Important is it to be aware of that the categories overlap and interconnect on many different levels. I will not say that transhumanism and posthumanism are opposed in any way. Of course, we can argue that they have some oppositions, but a great example of transhumanist posthumanism, if we can talk about that, which also includes ecology, would be found in Haraway's A Cyborg Manifesto, which is one of the classical texts in posthuman theory. So, in the following examples of sonic art, that should also be clear somehow. Yes, I will present three case studies. And in order to address the post-human attitudes in the sonic arts, I have chosen these 3 case studies which are having similar approaches of engaging with non-human actors, but their methods, perspectives, and results are quite different. So, first one. The New York-based musician and composer David Rothenberg has an ongoing musical project called Nightingales in Berlin. For several years, Rothenberg has visited Berlin in the spring months, where the nightingales are especially active. According to Rothenberg, the nightingales are attracted to sound in general, and not just to sound from other nightingales. Rothenberg found out that Berlin has a great combination of the soundscape of a big city and a plethora of parks and green spaces, which means an encounter with the nightingale isolated from traffic noise is highly possible. In his project, Rothenberg is not just listening to the nightingales, though they have a mesmerizing sonic quality in themselves. Instead, he wants to interact with them through his own musical practice, an art called response between musician and bird. Also, this year, Rothenberg had planned to go to Berlin to do his nightingale performances. But as we are all aware of, due to COVID-19, heavy travel restrictions were enforced, and therefore he could not go. His solution was very similar to the situation of this panel today. The performance must be streamed. Together with 2 other Berlin-based artists, Monika Dorniak and Martina Poznanska, I formed the Berlin outpost of the streaming session. Armed with mobile internet access, microphones, loudspeakers, and video cameras, we went to the Rehberge Park in the northern part of Berlin. We established an online connection to Rothenberg in his studio in New York, and also to the musician Rob Thorne, who was in his studio in New Zealand. Rothenberg had thereby created a live concert triangulation across 3 continents, through which the nightingales and the musicians could sonically engage with each other. Oh, there we go. Rothenberg's concept is not just to play along in parallel to the singing of the nightingales, as if they were 2 separate entities colliding in the same sound space. He knows that the nightingales are very aware of and reactive to their sonic environment. With his musical instruments, often woodwinds, Rothenberg is thus tuning into nightingales by playing longer or shorter phrases with breaks in between, where he can listen to how the song of the nightingales might change. The online session between New York, Berlin, and New Zealand had a duration of around 40 minutes. We did not move around chasing the nightingales. When we found a nightingale, we tried to get as close to it as possible and then we stayed there for the whole session. It was evident that the bird reacted to the sounds played by Rothenberg and Thorne, as it did get closer to us during the session and got quite loud. So we can ask...
Jacob, I'm very sorry, you have about 5 minutes left.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
sorry.
Sorry to...
Okay, very good, very good.
Dampen your spirits, but yeah, this is a situation.
I will ask, I'll just jump one example and take another one, and then we're good. So we can ask, what did the nightingale hear? What did the nightingale think? What is it like to be a nightingale? These questions are very hard to answer, but I will address them in the end of the paper. Now you will not listen to this one, but you'll instead get to this one. Cecilia Johnson had a 2-month residency in the Singor residency in Berlin. She's a Swedish artist and was doing a research at the sewage research facility Berliner Wasserbetriebe. She set up an experiment consisting of 8 sound stations, and you can see them on the left photo. Each sound station consisted of a water container filled with sewage water, an iron plate, and different kinds of loudspeakers. Johnson's experiment was quite simple. How would the bacteria from the sewage water, which largely are bacteria from human feces, react to the specific sounds played to them in the water container? And how would this reaction manifest in the oxidization process of the metal plate? Over a period of 2 weeks, the bacteria in the water containers were sonically affected by pure sine waves in an extended frequency spectrum ranging from infrasounds through to ultrasounds. In one container, a recording of the artist's voice repeatedly saying "me" was played. In another, a piece of classical music was played. After the 2 weeks of sonic exposure, the now oxidized iron plates were taken out of their water containers and exhibited in the Schering-Stiftung Gallery. In the exhibition, the visitor could see the iron plates as well as listening to the specific sounds to which the iron plates had been exposed to. The original intention of Johnson, the artist, was not to have the sounds played along to, the exhibited iron plates, but the curator insisted that there must be sound in a sound art exhibition. For the artist, the sound part was the process and the oxidized iron plates the outcome. The exhibition Contemporary Diagram Berlin was a highly speculative attempt to experiment beyond the limit of human sensation. Therefore, she also did not need a direct correlate between sonic process and visual outcome. Nevertheless, we need to ask, what did the bacteria hear? What did the bacteria think? What is it like to be a bacterium? These questions are very hard to answer, but now I'll address them as I'm coming to the end of the paper. And I'll keep it very brief. The philosopher Thomas Nagel quite famously asked the question, how is it like to be a bat? The answer to the question is that we would never really know how it exactly is to be like a bat. I think we will find the answer by reading Donna Haraway again. She says in my paraphrasing, if we cannot become other, become bat, become nightingale, become spider, or become bacterium, then we need to become with other. Or as she also liked to formulate it, we need to learn how to make kin. This is a difficult exercise, an exercise that includes ecological thinking, agential thinking, perspectival thinking, and thinking in scales, and at least not acting. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, Jacob, thank you very much. I'm really sorry I had to limit your timing a little bit, but We'll be sure to post all the links to the projects alongside the video. And yeah, let's keep in mind that we still have some pieces from Masha and Katya to listen to. But before that, anybody have any questions, notes? I have a question, but I will hold it for now.
So the project that I jumped over, that's Thomas Saraceno's Arachnid Orchestra, which is very well documented on a website. So we can maybe post a link to that one when people.
All right. Well, if nobody else have any questions, then I have one. You said that well, to me, it was quite a memorable phrase when you said that you consider every piece of art to have a potential for a theory, right? So there is a theory potential encapsulated in art. But when you started talking about your pieces, you started talking about attitudes, not theories, right? So there's a potential for theory, but you take out an attitude. So how does that work?
Yeah. So I don't think that attitude and potential theory conflict at all.
All right.
I think the attitude, as I also tried to lay it out, was my theorizing of how I understand the post-human in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And that attitude is instead of an aesthetic theory or an aesthetic idea of how does the post-human sound like, then it's more like how to address something that can encompass a lot of different artworks instead of going into this is an aesthetic tendency. So I'm not really sure if I understand the question. I think the attitude is just a way to address topics that we find in post-human theories.
All right.
And they can then be opened up from there.
All right. Again, I've only recently started studying post-human theory, but this is what you're saying right now sounds very post-human to me. Right? So you're talking about theories, but then again, you kind of personalize attitudes, and yeah, that's like the theories become situated in some sort of experience, right? And once they become situated, they produce attitudes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this is how I look at that. All right, and there is a question from the chat that I've been holding. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on what sonic arts possibly can take from the post-human approach? And I would like to address this question both to Katya with Maria and Jacob, and maybe after that we can listen to two more pieces. So how can you comment on this one?
Yeah, should I start?
Well, let's ask Katya maybe or Masha for a change, and then you also submit your answer. Sure. Masha, you turned on your microphone, yeah, so that might mean something.
Say something.
Okay, I think now Katya starts with conceptual theory about the voice in posthumanism. And for me, it was also interesting conceptions because I didn't think about that, because I think about posthuman theory, I think that it's more about ecological problem or something like that. And some sound art pieces, for example, should be like this. But when we talk with Katya about voice, I change my mind. And so, Katya, please.
Well, I think when we continue our dialogue, small dialogue, we will show the answer for this question, because actually when I wanted to say a bit about horrid voice, the concept of horrid voice, the concept of wild wisdom, as well as crying and feminine sublime in a machinic voice. And Masha helped me with examples, so I will just wait for our
Right, good. So some preliminary comments from Jacob before we embark on listening.
Yeah, so what was the question?
Yeah, what sonic arts possibly could take from post-human approach?
Well, as I see the post-human as a theoretical field, it is kind of the dominating field of theory today. And I see clearly that arts in general and also sonic arts are approaching the arts through these theories. So I think it can open up something that could not be done by only theorizing. I think it's this acting that can show us something else. And I'm sure that it's not just for sonic arts. Sonic arts is just arts working with sound. So I don't, like, of course it can show something else than other arts can do, because it has its own material. I don't think that it's hierarchically superior in any way to show anything post-human.
All right, thank you. So Katya and Masha, you have the floor again.
Okay, thanks. I will try very briefly.
Andrei, I'm sorry. Can I ask Jacob? I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Jacob, in your cases, we observed a ray of light or a spot on the tree crown. Can we consider this visual effect as a kind of interference in the sonic environment? And this interference could be crucial for changing sonic environment. What do you think about this visual noise?
Yes. Well, it didn't affect the singing of the nightingale. We had the lamp so we can find our way through the park. It was pretty dark, and Rothenberg, he wanted us to create some visuals, kind of, and he just liked this of lighting it from below the trees. He had also experienced that it didn't create any pollution of the aesthetic outcome from the nightingale. So it didn't really matter. The bird kept singing. I thought that we had to be very quiet. We had to like snug in on it. We had to turn off the lamp as soon as we heard it somewhere and trying to find it. But it didn't care. I think it enjoyed the pollution in a way. That was also kind of one of the arguments from Rothenberg.
Nightingales enjoy the spotlight. All right, so yeah, thanks. And Masha and Katya, please.
Very briefly. So pure voice and so on in the context of Nietzsche. For the first, I would like to explain why Nietzsche, transhumanism actually uses Nietzsche's concept of superhuman to show the connection between post-human and superhuman as a goal of human evolution. But I would like to emphasize the Nietzsche's thought is that his thought is rather about or beyond the human. So it's moving into the direction of animal and female and dancing god and so on and so on. So if we remind the plot of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, so once Zarathustra awakened alone in the forest among animals and started to speak by horrid voice, using horrid voice. So the horrid voice symbolized here for Nietzsche the access to the wild wisdom. And for Nietzsche, actually, the roar, which is located behind the facade of civilization, the facade that keeps human subjectivity within the given framework, the roar, the horrid voice, into which Zarathustra's voice was transformed. The roar is a symbol of harsh cosmic energy, which is the basis for the creation of civilization, societies, and subject, and with which is usually neglected by humans. But at the same time, this energy, this wild wisdom, at the same time, it surpasses the human. And this question about horrid voice, I think, in Nietzschean work, put some questions. For the first question, how far we can go beyond the man boundaries if we are immersed in the language? And actually, if we are rather as human beings about language, not rather about some sound and voice in a pure sense of this word, so actually whether the inhuman or non-human attainable for us, whether we can go beyond ourselves. And Nietzsche suggests the answer to this question, discussing this phenomenon, horrid voice. And this is an attempt to clear the voice from false semantics, so that only its sounds remains. The pure voice acoustics, the pure acoustic of the word. After that, a wild wisdom can be heard, heard in the dark seat of the voice. So horrid voice appears to be the emphasis of the dark seat of the human voice. And actually, I have here a political question. Animals and machines are voiceless in our culture, and what is like to have a human voice, or what is like to have a voice, actually. The question of representation of voiceless entities appears here for me. Whether technology could help us to translate this wild wisdom, non-human wisdom, dark seat of the voice, and make this translation possible. And my answer, I think that it is impossible, but okay, maybe we'll discuss it later. The second point, I would like to discuss briefly crying. Crying as a concept in the such a field as extinction studies. We can find this concept in Tom van Doren work, Flight Ways, where he discusses the case with Hawaiian crows, that birds that are losing their environment, and they are crying, Van Doren writes. And actually we have among crows such a I don't know, ritual, maybe more, well, they represent mourning by crying. And actually this point with crying as another dimension of voice, and actually maybe this could connect the voice and connect this idea of crying and put it in a political dimension, because here when we are crying and people crying, here we are all together, we are responsible for each other, between humans and non-humans. So I think that the point about crying very interesting in sound studies and could be interestingly discussed. But and the last part is a feminine sublime. As I said, there is a book written by Joanna Zielinska. It's called On Spiders, Cyborgs, and Being Scared, the feminine and the sublime. where Zelinska, for example, discussed the case of Laurie Anderson, musician, when she changed her voice, into machinic voice. And actually here appears to be a very interesting question about feminine sublime and technological sublime and monstrosities, and this connection between machine and female, which in the modern the culture of modernity very frequent. And here I would like to stop and maybe ask Masha to continue, because I spoke a lot. Okay.
Thank you, Katya. It's it was really inspiring for me as an artist. And I have another questions. For example, to make sound, what does it mean? What does it mean to record sound? What does it mean to record the sound we make? And how much is human in human voice? How much social, how much natural, how much rational, what part is responsible for the voice? And here immediately comes for me the thought of text sound poetry, where the sound of the pronounced text is primary, and the text itself may also arise from sound properties. And I think every sound you make is a gap of space. And here the relationship of our mouth with the space in which the sound is made is important, and the relationship of the tongue, for example, as part of the body that performs physical manipulations inside the mouth. And I would start. I would like to show the origins of text sound poetry and a known language that, for example, Alexei Kruchonych had. So let's listen some excerpt of that.
Dir, bul, shil, ubeshur, skum, v, se, bu, r, l, ez, boyen, kr, dred, abredik, dradadak, ах, зю, зю, зум, дбр, жрл, жрт, банч, банч, фазузузу, зумб, бой, бойма, вр, драх, дыбах, д, вз, ц, 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 амс, мас, кса.
So yes, and we know a lot of examples of speaking and in that way. And the next pieces, it's excerpt of theme of Luciano Berio, Omaggio e Joyce. Is an electroacoustic composition for voice and tape. And here, I think, starting a manipulation with voice and machines and relationships between that. And this piece is based on the interpretive reading of the poem Sirens from chapter 11 of the novel Ulysse by James Joyce by Katie Berberian, and on the elaboration of her recorded voice by technological means. And I think this composition was made between 1958 and 1959, but I think it sounds modern, contemporary. The next part about horrid voice. I want to speak about Trevor Richard, composer, and the next example relates to onomatopoeia and in the balance between guessing a horrid human voice and not being able to guess it. Face it with a real human voice, we may not believe that is it. And perhaps this is a voice that we will never hear because just because we know how a human voice sounds. So Trevor Richard in 1980 decided to write a cycle of 6 vocal pieces dealing with many different aspects of what it means to be human, as he said, and using the voice as the focus for the exploration. The piece Vox would begin with the sounds of the creation as suggested in various creation myths from around the world. It's Vox 1, and lead eventually to the disintegration of human society, Vox 4. In between these 2 poles, Vox 2 would deal with contemplation of the natural world, and Vox 3 with the excitement of intellectual exploration itself through the use of increasingly elaborate rhythmical games. And the Vox pieces are amplified vocal quartets with or without tape accompaniment. And the tape sounds are both musical accompaniment and an environment in which the vocalization takes place. And the sonic landscapes are not photographic, but landscapes of myth relating to our experience of the world. These sounds are organized musically to complement the voice. So we will listen some excerpts from this for Vox 1, 2, 3, and 4.
I flere solmænd.
So the next example, I would like to show an example of my work, which is based on the score of Pauline Oliveris. In one moment, I was tired of the sounds of the machine makes and went into an experiment with limitation. I decided to use the instrument that is always with me and inside me, its voice, and the sounds of the voice that I recorded, I tried to make without thinking about how it should sound. I was looking for that sound that would break out of me by accident for the subsequent transformation. And the work was done for the 8-channel system, and I will show a piece mixed in stereo. So the next piece I'd like to show is the performance of Nastya Tolshneva, artist performance and singing.
Masha, I'm very sorry, about 5 minutes
I have,
left.
Yes,
okay,
yes,
good.
I have 5 minutes.
Yeah, we can extend our session to up until I think 30 minutes for discussion, but for now, yeah, 5 minutes limit.
So yeah, performance of Nastya Tolshneva and Anya Kravchenko. Nastya is artist, performer and singer, and Anya artist and dancer. And their performance Мерцание is a concert practice for 2 performance mediated by the digital agent, which records, distorts, and amplifies performance voice in real time, thus coupling them in common body. Within that ethereal unit, performance acts in constant shifting, almost flickering, мерцание in Russian, between affective and analytical responses. And the artist created an environment in which communication took place between the machine and their bodies through the voice, which was sent to the computer program and then returned to the environment with instant processing. And the next, their movements of the performance performers took place under the influence of the returned sound. And in a sense, the artists were balancing between rational and invented actions and those that happened unintentionally. So.
Yeah, I've posted the link on the chat. There is a promotional video, so if anybody wants to take a look at it later,
yes,
you're all welcome.
Okay, just one. Let's finish 1 minute with Laurie Anderson, Superman.
Oh, Superman. Oh, John. Oh, Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad. Oh, Superman. Smoky. But if you want to.
No, but in this performance was. No, this is not. Ah, yes. This like a mouse.
To give to you. Here come the plane. This is the hand.
So thank you. We didn't talk about ecology examples of ecological sound art pieces, but I think I also can share some, because there are a lot of works like that about field recordings, about some microphones which can amplify everything.
All right.
In the end of your presentation, I have a desire to finish with the words "Thus spoke Zarathustra." So we have here many examples of horrid voice, and I think that in the last example with Laurie Anderson, we have an interesting idea of connection between speech and hands, so gestures, and it's actually anthropological approach immersed in this video too, I think.
Right. Well, thanks for the presentation, and again, we'll be sure to post all the links with the video. And I was very happy to see the Laurie Anderson piece, because I've been discussing it with my students over the past 12 years. All right. So I think we could extend our talk for another 30 minutes if nobody is pressed for time. So if anybody have any questions, if anybody has any questions at this point, I have some closing questions, so I will refrain from asking questions right now. So any discussion points, comments? We haven't heard from Dennis in a long while, so maybe he would like to join in with some insights, or if not.
Okay, you know, I have a question. It's a sequel of my previous question to Jacob. Why, when we try to do sound studies, we are hostages of visual content? For instance, Maria demonstrated a kind of interface when she reproduced a sound. What's going on, guys? Why we need a visual representation of sound? I think that sound guys from sound studies should provide a kind of emancipation from visual content, from visualization. In the case of Jacob, when we shoot into the bird with a ray of light, and in the case of Maria, when we staring at the interface and waiting for the finish of this moving of the bar. Guys, what's going on? Please explain.
I'm sorry, I want to put a black square when I put these examples, but I forget about
But in
that.
the case of
So
Superman, it's a kind of video clip, right? It's a kind of video, it's a kind of visual representation. Guys, it's a visual terrorism in the sense of interference, of pollution, as Jacob said. Where is the sound? How can I
absolutely agree with you.
I totally agree as well, and I also.
I'm sorry for this provocative mood, but please, guys, take it as a performance, okay? Visual performance, of course.
So, what also often happens in sound studies and musicology is that no sound is present at all. It's just theory, it's just the history and all that. That, of course, doesn't say that we should always have visual presentations of sound works. But I totally agree. I also thought about exactly that prior to preparing for today. And I would have done it differently if I was in a room with you together. I think that was what triggered me, but I totally follow you as well.
I have something to say about that as well. Well, first of all, I don't feel like I have to justify sound studies to anybody. That's the first point. But secondly, I think that the sonic perspective is just, well, just being born in a way. And I think that your point, Dennis, about those visual, side tracks that are still accompany the sonic content. Yeah, that's an issue that has to be faced and has to be addressed, especially artistically. Yeah, with a lot of sound works, I have a similar issue, especially when they are presented in some sort of gallery space or stuff like that, right? So sometimes it feels like sound is not fascinating enough.
Okay, guys, I imagined a kind of thick description. I mean, ethnographic thick description of sounds. For instance, cosmonauts' voices in their reports, their short reports. I know such kind of psychological description of or studies, psychological studies of their conversation with interference and so on, so on, so on. And I imagine this thick description in the dark, because my ear should be so attentive to the sound, it's not attention of pictures or visual content.
Right.
In this sense,
Okay.
when I want to say something about my sonic perception of different species around in my environment, it's not about pictures.
All right. Well, again, sorry for monopolizing the answer to this one, but as a moderator, so the thing is that it's not very often in your life that you actually see the dark. So if you're presented with darkness, it doesn't mean that you're depraved of visuals, right? So darkness calls your attention. So when I talk about listening to pure sound, I would rather think about seeing what you habitually see, right? So I can focus on sound more, not in the darkness, but when the visual, they don't call my attention, right? So it's the same thing that happens to, I think, every one of us when you have a walk outside and you're listening to music in your, I don't know, earphones, right? So you're in a kind of environment that visually does not take your attention away from the sound. So this would be my take on your question here. I'm not sure if anybody agrees.
Well, I would also agree that darkness or listening to sound is not a neutral way of listening. And of course, if the visual overtake or doesn't fit to it or is misrepresenting what it should represent for the sound, like I had no trouble at all with looking at this audio interface while listening to the sound files, because for me it was kind of transparent, like it didn't mean anything else, it didn't disturb me too much. So
well, probably for you as a sound artist, this is a usual thing again.
Yeah, maybe that.
Well, I think maybe the answer for this question is actually in the book Gesture and Speech. The book anthropological investigation of the connections between voice and gesture that actually shows how every instrument, as well as human hands, transformed into eyes. So we can say this book, I can say that it shows that the human is the human eyes. So, and this is why we can't experience the world, you know, in a human way normally, maybe bad word, but what makes us human, it's our visualization of the world. So maybe this is why we have such problems with listening.
Yeah, I've posted the book on chat, Gesture and Speech by André Leroy-Gourand, and it's been translated into English. Dennis, your turn.
As far as I know, some guys, you know, like John Uri, they fight for the kind of, they want to liberate another feelings from the visual Herrschaft, right?
Herrschaft.
And in this
domination,
sense, of
of
course,
the visual.
for me, it's not a matter of pure perception. Of course not. Pure sonic perception. No. But in my question, it was, it was a question about a degree of visual presence in euphonic interventions in this sense. But okay, thank you for your answers. I see the point.
Yeah, actually, two other things come to mind. There is an audiovisual litany explained by Jonathan Stern in his introduction to the sound studies reader back in 2008, I guess, or 09. I think 2012, the last edition was. And of course, different modes of listening in Michel Chian's work, right? So we can listen to different matters. But okay, let's circle back to posthumanism for now, and we'll leave out justifying sound studies for a later session. We have a lot of very interesting questions from the audience, and if you don't mind, I would like to verbalize some of them. Leaving out the most tasty one for later. So there was a question back, it was 1 hour and 15 minutes ago. Take a look at it, guys. Can we consider the holograms in contemporary musical performances, for example, like hologramic Michael Jackson or Tupac Shakur, as posthumous subjectivity, and how? Yeah, maybe a naive question, but anyway, I think it's quite appealing. It's quite interesting. So, and of course, the sonic modality was the first one in which we were able to create virtual realities, right? Because to create a sonic virtual reality is much simpler than to create like a VR, right? So what do you think about this, about people living on as holograms after their bodies have passed away? So who wants to touch on those holographic bodies?
Well, I think it's a classical question. So when you start to discuss post-humanist approach.
So could you please provide a classical answer?
A classical answer that subjectivity appears in between. So subjectivity, according to this approach, doesn't connect to a peculiar personification, we could say. It can't appear in
specific embodiment.
Yeah, it's something in between. When you are meeting someone, something, when you are going through something. So it is rather materialistic and discursive at the same time, if we can say that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Good. Well, okay, let's get, I mean, if anybody else have anything else to say.
But I think that if we can prove or argue that this hologramic Michael Jackson has a kind of perception, then we can consider this hologramic image as subjectivity, person, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, there is a certain lingo, there is a certain type of language that posthuman studies employ, like replacing subjectivity with actorship. And that's also very important, I guess. So you don't have to be a subject to be an actor. And I guess the role of the subject is somehow downplayed. I'm not sure, I'm not a specialist in posthuman studies, but this is how I feel about it. Am I right?
Yeah, well, it's like the dualism between objectivity and subjectivity is quite contagious. Like it's been discussed so much, and that is one of those main dualisms that post-human theory is trying to break away from. So by using other language such as agents or actors or network theories and all that, it's a way of, because we of course understand through putting words on something, speaking about something, writing books about something. So if a word is so contaminated with meaning, then it might often be good to just leave it alone, and trying to find something else, though it might be like an artificial attempt in the beginning, but then we can try to mold our brains through this new way of putting words on what is out there.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to read the final question from the audience, and I'm going to piggyback on it with my own question, because I would like to, this is a question for everyone, right? We have to finalize our talk today, and I'm going to read from the chat, and this is a contribution from the user called LX, who's been, or they have been very helpful today. So the question is, if we are still encountering the post-human through our human or cultural biases, what might be a sign of that we are really getting access to somebody else's perspective? Or also, after listening to the work shown by Maria, how can we overcome such an aesthetic problem when anything unintended and illegible for human listener by default seems to be able to convey non-human-like feelings without necessarily conveying deeper meaning? So if you can take a look at the chat, you can read this question. It's pretty lengthily worded, but I would like to add on top on that. So I was trying to finalize my notes for today, and I just wrote down 3 words. Now, those words were used by some of you in different contexts and with different meanings. So 3 words are attitude. This comes from Jacob, I guess. The second word is focus, and this came from Yekaterina. And the third word is exercise, right? And these words sort of made me think about the connection between the words theory and theater. So as you know, theory and theater are actually etymologically connected. They come from the same root. And to me, it sounded like that explaining post-human is about the same as experiencing post-human. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. So I was thinking, if I want to have a really post-human day in my life, I would like to live one day of my life as a post-human, or as a scholar of post-human theory. How do I change my attitude? How do I focus differently? How do I exercise post-humanity, or being a post-human? How do you enter this realm? Because a lot of works on post-humanism, especially on art, they start with, I walk into a forest, or I walk into a room. So how do you walk into post-humanism? And this is the question I would like to put on the table right now. And maybe some of you can, well, all of you, I would like all of you to comment on this one.
I don't know if I should start. I would also make some of you others start. I think you already had the answer from Katja's speech, like the openness towards the other, like that's the exercise. So going out there, if you want it as an exercise, and go out there and try to be open to what the other is, and try not to think too much about your history and all your luggage. And it's a very, very hard exercise, because there's so much that you don't know that you think you know. There's so much that needs to be changed in order to get that attitude. It's not the way I use the word attitude, but no problem with that. I think this.
Yeah, I twisted it. all over the place. Yeah, I know.
Fine. Yeah, basically that would be my answer to use. I already mentioned the answer.
All right. Anybody else?
Well, maybe it is also about thinking and doing, that there is no gap between thinking and doing something. As Karin Barad writes, matter matters. So, and even in English, these words are connected, matter and to matter. So this is why I think, and actually I receive interesting questions from my students when I'm teaching posthumanism, critical posthumanism. The first question is whether I eat meat, whether I use animal products. Well, and this is actually these questions remind me that philosophy should be action. And if you are speaking about something, if you're introducing concept or think some old concept, you should act not in the same way, but your life should change too, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but in my life, it looks like that.
So do you eat meat?
Yes, and
Okay.
it's a big encourage to eat meat. And this is a big sacrifice from me and from these creatures. And of course, I know that Haraway and other non-human philosophers don't like this word sacrifice, but I think that it is about being an art of eat and being eaten after death. So and during your life, I need to allow the others to eat me, to give something to others, to this world, maybe even speaking, discussing something, writing, or trying to protect the other animals from violence, or because and I think that we should actually to be compostable in this way, that eat, but at the same time remember that you should be a piece of the others. I don't know, food.
No, that's a very, you made at least 3 very interesting points, and I think this is something to take away from our today's conversation. Anybody else? Yeah, Masha, you turned on your mic.
I want to say that yes, agree with Katya and Jacob that and too many questions was today about sonic arts and sound art works, how it related with posthumanism, and these questions, how to put it into practice. But I think the theory of posthumanism is already a practice in which we live. So do we actually need to analyze, I don't know, as a human, as an artist, in general, this practice of posthumanism, or just live in that?
Dennis?
Okay, Andrei, I think that you don't need to start to be a posthumanist for a day, because you are posthumanist right now. Elizabeth Povinelli, in her book Geontologists, suggests to answer the questions from the perspective of your lungs. When you are smoking or just breathing, you are connected, and you are with different creatures, with dying and living of different creatures, and you and me, we are responsible for other forms of being in this sense, and we are post-humanists right now.
All right, just a follow-up question. Is there a difference between a post-human and a post-humanist?
Okay, I don't use this word because for me it's a narrow tradition, theoretical tradition. I use the term non-human, but in this sense, you have a deal with non-humans right now.
Okay, so
In post-human, post-humanals, post-humorals, and so on ways.
all right, thank you. And I see that Mila has joined us on the video channel. Would you like to say anything?
Eventually.
No, I was there all along, almost. But well, I just I was waiting for you to come to an end and to say goodbye. Just a couple of words in Russian also. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it feels like, I mean, this was, to me, a very interesting conversation, but of course there is a lot of loose ends. And those loose ends, they go into different directions, and each of those directions are worth exploring. So I have a feeling that we didn't talk that much today about particular sound art pieces, which I think we could organize eventually another session on, just to make sense of one or two pieces in depth, because of course they all deserve, any artistic work deserves a lot of attention. And so this is my closing, I guess. This is my closing speech before I give floor to Luda for some comments in Russian. I would like to thank you all. A lot of things in posthumanism now make sense to me, more than 2 hours ago, and I would like to thank Mila for putting this all together. This has been a great effort, and well, I also appreciate all the time that you've invested in this talk today. So I'm shutting up, and yeah, the word goes to Mila.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Andrei. It's been terrific. And now I will switch into Russian. Да, я еще раз хотела бы поблагодарить теперь уже на русском всех дорогих спикеров. И хотела бы напомнить, что сегодняшняя наша встреча стала возможной благодаря поддержке библиотеки иностранной литературы и нашего, не нашего, точнее, научного семинара филологического факультета МГУ под названием «Антропология звука». Так что, если вас заинтересовала сегодняшняя встреча, смело подписывайтесь на обновления в Фейсбуке, на библиотеку, естественно, да, и на антропологию звука. Мы еще что-нибудь обязательно сделаем вместе. Вот.
Мы попытаемся, как бы, так как мы и Мила имеем отношение, ну вот Мила, прежде всего, к закупкам книг в библиотеку. Все те книги, которые вы упомянули, мы обязательно проверим, есть ли они там, и посоветуем библиотеке их закупить, чтобы они все были.
Да, обязательно.
Потому что там постгуманизм должен идти в массы.
Да.
Коллеги, я думаю, будет справедливо сказать, что Андрей великолепно сегодня вел, и нужно его, конечно, поблагодарить за это невероятное искусство и умение объединять и разруливать потоки. Андрей, спасибо большое за ведение.
Не за что. Мне всегда приятно, когда люди понимают, как это иногда нелегко бывает. Вот. Но подписывайтесь, да, и опять-таки, if you have any links that you would like to share, we'll be happy, like for the Post-Human Lab, of course, right? Any particular projects that you're doing, any videos, anything, we will do a lengthy post on that in our community, and yeah, we'll be happy to share anything. Ну, тогда...
Thank you for a very inspiring conversation. Thank you for everyone. I will find you on the Facebook, Jacob. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, all right. So enjoy the rest of your evening or night, depending on where you are.
Thanks from Berlin. It was really a pleasure.
Okay, so
Yeah.
bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Sergey, я думаю...